Hi everyone, I'm Elad. I'm a 13 years web developer. I'm a CSS HTML architect at investing.com. It means that I'm a front-end developer that does only CSS, and I love it very much. Besides this, I'm writing a lot of articles on CSS at medium.com. You can find them on this link. I'm lecturing on a lot of meetup and conferences in Israel. Besides this, I'm the founders of the CSS Masters Israel Community with almost 5,000 memberships. And if you are not there, you are all welcome to join. And let's talk about CSS, because CSS is very easy. All web developers can learn it so fast. It's so easy that why to learn it now, because everybody know it because it's so easy to use. Not really, because when you are not thinking how to write it properly, very fast, like in all programming language, if you don't try to order it right, it's very easy comes spaghetti code, like in every programming language. And it's like a long cascading style sheet become, and because you don't understand your own selectors, you're all the time adding more classes, and because you're so afraid to break the code, and because nobody understands the code, where you put your new style? In the bottom of this cascading style sheet. And after 2 to 3 years, you don't have what to do, and you need to create a new redesign because nobody can understand or to change or update the code properly. As the most important thing to create a website in CSS is arranging your code. It's the most important thing in every programming language, and in CSS it's the most important. To create a arranged code, you need to use one of the preprocessors. It can be SAS preprocessor, less, stylus, choose whatever you want. We come here today to talk about architecture of types of storytelling methodology. And there is atomic design that is very similar to object-oriented. It's becoming from small object to bigger and bigger object. And there is IDCSS methodology. It's very similar. It's saying that the most common thing you will use in all the project, and when you're becoming more specific, it's becoming explicit, and it means that it's beginning to be less and less generic and less usable. I can talk with you today and explain you atomic design or IDCSS architectures, but you can see it in the web, you don't need me for that. And I want to learn you how I'm creating my architecture in CSS. Because I'm doing some stuff that exists in the other architectures, but I'm doing a lot of stuff different, and I want to learn you from what I'm experienced and how I can make a better architecture with CSS. The first important thing is you have the main folder of the CSS. You write it the project name, and inside it you have three main files. The project name in the end of SCSS, and two inner files, the config file and the local file. Beside this, you don't have any other files in this folder. The config file will call all other configuration files. In all these configuration files, we have mostly or SAS variables or CSS variables. And why I separate them into separate small files? Because if you have one big file of CSS variables or SAS variables, it's very hard to understand it when you first look at it. And if you separate it into small ideas, it's more easy for you to understand when you read all the configuration file. Besides this, we have the local file that has all other parts of CSS, components, reset, mixing, utility class, layout, templates, everything will be inside the local. As the config file, we call all the other main in the config file folders, and the local, we call all the others files in the local folder. Let's see how it looks inside the project name, project name's main CSS file. It does two imports, one the import of the config and one the import of the local. Besides this, you don't have any other things in this file, only these two files, no other things. And see the underscore in the beginning of the file, it means this file is an inner file and you don't want it to compile separately. Only files without the underscore we want to compile. Because that, you don't have to write this the underscore and the end name of the file. You can just write it like this, config/local, and that's it. Okay? And let's see what configuration we have and how configuration in CSS is looking like. This is the main config file. It's just doing import to all other config files. And let's look in the colors config file. Inside, I'm using CSS variables, native. I'm preferring this day to work with HSL colors. It means that I can create base colors, let's say green, and make from this green another 3 types of green. And this way, if I change the green to red, all the other greens will change to red according to the main color. But I won't go for this deeply because I just want to see how a config file is looking like. Besides, because we're working in small files of components, we wanted that the responsive media queries will be in every separate file of every component. Here I use SAS variables to save those media rules inside SAS variables. And I'm just using those SAS variables inside every component, and if I want to update the media rules, I will update them in one place and not in 70 files. As until now, we talk about the project name main folders, that we have 3 files, project name main file that called the local and the config. The config called all others config files, and the local we still didn't see. Local, we will call all the other locals stuff. As what we have in the local main folder. First, one of the first things that you want in a project in CSS is resetting it. Why we need to reset a CSS project? What a lot of web developers doesn't know, that even if you didn't load any CSS to your website, you have some styles that coming from the browser. But the problem that there is browser that doesn't work the same. It means that I can have, let's say most of the browser will give the H2 tag a font size of 2 EM, but Explorer will give it 1.5 EM. As I don't want that every browser will look different. Because of this, we have type of resets. Nicholas Gallagher create a normalized CSS file. The normalized CSS file, what it does, is creating normalized for the most common styles of the browser. And if the H2 tag have a 1.5 EM and all the other browser have a font size of 2 EM, the normalize will update the H2 tag for 2 EM that all the browser will behave the same. But there is other type of CSS reset. There is the CSS of Eric Meyer. Eric Meyer created a CSS that's saying that I don't want any style of the browser because I don't need the font size that the browser gives for the H tag because I want to describe what size it is. And Eric Meyer CSS resetting all the HTML tag. He doesn't want the margin, the padding, the border, the font size, nothing. The bullets of the list tags. He doesn't want anything. But I don't like the CSS reset of Eric Meyer because when you are debugging your code, you see in the debugging these selectors. You see a lot of selectors that you don't want to read them when you're debugging your code. You see this and sometimes you try to read it, but you cannot read this selector, it's too long. And all these overrides will make you very confusing to understand the CSS. As how I'm working with the CSS reset. I love CSS Normalized. I always use the CSS Normalized of Nicholas Gallagher, but I love CSS Reset too. But what I'm doing, my CSS Reset file doing free reset. I'm using the Normalized of Nicholas Gallagher's, and I'm using my own CSS reset that I have been created. But I'm doing it a lot differently. I'm resetting all the HTML tags to box size and border box. It means that if I will give a size of width of 100 pixels, it will include the border and the padding. What doesn't happen in CSS usually. I will remove all the list style, the margin, the padding, because a lot of time I'm using the ULLI tags elements without the bullets when I need it to menu navigation and other stuff. And I don't want the font size of all the H1 tag, H2, H3. But when I'm resetting it like this, it's when I will debug my code, if I will I do inspect elements to H2 tag, I will see only this style and not 2,000 elements. And it will be a lot easier to understand when debugging your code with a reset that it is more precise. Besides this, I have another reset that in every project it behaves differently. It's a reset of the typography, how the text is looking, and it depends, in every website it will be different. In this reset, I will put my font family for all the website, the font, the basic font size I want, the line height, the color of the font. Maybe I don't want that the color will be black and I want it to be dark gray. And I have another trick in CSS that I'm doing here. In all the website, I'm not using pixel for font size, I'm using REM. But I'm raising the font size of the REM to 1 pixel in the HTML, for one font size of 1 pixel. And what I'm doing, every time that I'm writing the font, I'm writing it REM. Let's say if I want 24 pixels, I will write 24 REM. And if I need a header that with 40 pixels, I will write 40 REM. But what I'm gaining from that? I'm gaining from that if I need to increase the size of all the font size in the website, I can do it from one place. I will update the font size in the HTML from 1 pixel to 1.2. And this is a big advantage, because if I want to do accessibility for the website, I can control it from one place. And this is a big advantage. And let's talk about mixing. Mixing is kind of a small function in SAS. And if you never see mixing before, let's see how it's looking like. Besides it, the main mixing file doesn't have any function, just call a lot of function. Why I'm not writing all the function in one file? I want order, and order. All the time I want it to be more precise when I see the file and not getting lost in a big, huge file. And let's see one example of how mixing looks like. This is not my mixing, I never write it, but I'm using it. It's a snippet from CSS tricks. What that does, sometimes you're giving the user to write, let's say, comments in your website, but they can write the word no with 1,000 O, and it can breaking your layout. As there is a property in CSS that telling the browser that if there is a long word, break it. But the problem that there is 3 types of breaking word, and everybody doing it different. And this snippet of code, creating that all the browser will do it the same. As this is amazing snippet for breaking word. I'm using it all the time. And let's talk about important in CSS. What do you think about important in CSS? Good, bad? Bad.
It's important.
It's important. I think that sometimes it can be very good, but in very specific parts. Let's talk about utilities class. Utilities class in CSS you put a class and they're doing only one thing. For example, if I want to hide it in component, I can add a class that is hiding it. Utility class in my architecture always starting with the U letter. U hide will hide the component. And why do I have to use it in important? Let's say you have a component with cascading style of 2 classes. Let's say .foo space .bar. As let's say the .bar, they have display flex. Display flex, if we don't use here the important, will be stronger because it's 2 classes. And if we wanted UHide always win, we use important. This way, you show this class is winning. And if you don't want that the component will be hide, don't use the class. It's only doing one thing. This is the trick. It's good to use important in these cases. And this is how the utility class, utility file look like in my project. There is not so many classes. And if you need a class that you hide something only in some breakpoint, you can use it inside magic queries, and you're earning 2 things from that. And let's talk about grids and templates. Everybody thinks that doing layout in CSS is hard. You need Bootstrap, you need Foundation, you need everything, because it's so hard to make layout these days. But it's not so hard. This day, to make templates with CSS grid is so easy. Making a grid like this with CSS grid, it can take 5 minutes, and I'm not going to learn you how CSS grid, but you need to know that in 1 hour you can learn CSS grid quite good and create any layout you want that doesn't have any dependency in the order of the HTML, and you can make everything. And if you want to have another lecture on CSS grid, I will show you the link after we end this lecture. And in the redesign that we're working on, I'm using CSS grid all the time. If you will do inspect element, let's say in Firefox, you will see the line of the grid. So easy that to create a layout these days, really 5, 10, 15 minutes with CSS grid. It's very easy that I don't need to do so much to create any grid I want. And until now, I didn't talk anything about component, partials, nothing. But all the main thing of architecture is how do I order the partials. And now I'm putting all the partials in one folder, yes and no. The partials folder is divided. 1 second. The partials folder is divided to 5 layers of component, from the basic layers to the most complex layer. And the first important thing that I want that the most common layer always will be loaded first. And this is a nice trick I think that anybody can use in any programming languages. If there is important for the order or the order of the files, why not to use them with numbers? This way I know that the first need to be first, the second need to be second, the third need to be third, and on and on. And this is what I'm doing here, because sometimes the entity is depending on the component, and sometimes the component is depending on the element. And this way I'm making sure that I know that there is connection in the order of the loading. As this is how the partial file looks like, and calling all the other partial layers that we're going to talk about here shortly. And in every layer there is only import files of all one of the layers. Elements will call all the files in the elements folder, component in the component, and on. Okay? Yes? Yeah? Let's talk about element partials. Element partials are the smallest partial in CSS. Let's say headers, H type. And see, I'm never targeting in CSS HTML tag. And why I'm not doing targeting the H2 directly? Because tomorrow, the section title, the SEO will tell me that I don't want it in H2. I want it H3. I want it a div. I don't know. I don't want that if the SEO is changing the HTML tag, that my style will get broke. The layout, I don't want the design will change in the website. This way I'm making sure that if they change the HTML tag, nothing will happen. And common link, I never targeted the A tag. Why? Because most of the link won't be looking like the navigation bar. As it's only the link that I want to target, I will use common link. And anybody know what is the difference between links to buttons in the website?
That the link is a link, it's true that the button can do a lot of stuff?
Again, what you said?
Button submits a form?
No, what is
link? It's a specific link using an href that you click and you go outside the site.
No, yes.
But button, you check and you can do anything you want, the button.
Link, change the URL. This is the idea. And button can do other stuff. And why I'm not targeting just link and button for buttons, the button himself, the element itself, because sometimes the designer will want that links will look like buttons, and buttons will look like links. Okay? Sometimes, and in a BEM architecture that most of you maybe here not know, there is there is sometimes there you have a common button and you want to make some difference, as you need to create another class, common button, and change one. You have two classes, but I don't like that you have two classes for the same thing. And I want that the same style of the common button will be for common button 1 and common button 2. Anybody has any idea how I can create it in CSS? And I'm writing here only one class.
Inheritance from one to another.
How I can create it?
CS variables, no?
No.
Data attributes.
Huh?
Data attributes.
Class attribute, you are correct. I'm doing here a attribute selector. I'm searching the common button in the class. And any class that have this words common button will use these styles. And if now I want to add style to the common button 1, common button 2, or override, they are here and I can add style or override style of the common button. This is a nice trick that I'm using for buttons. Besides this, I have a state class. This is something nice that if you want to make a change to a certain button and you want it to be a full line, you can just add the class of isFullLine. And it's look nice in the code because if I will look here and you have common button space isFullLine, you understand this is common button isFullLine. It's explain what the button does. It's like a storytelling in the HTML element. And all the elements, small files, we are reading it from the main element file, and I've separated the ideas to buttons, to forms, to tables, just that I can understand it more fast when I see the file. And let's talk about common component partials. Like in every programming language, you have components. It can be server-side, JavaScript. You have some components, and this is the main header components. But in every component, you can put inside any component you want, or small elements that you want, like this button that we just talked about, a common button. And maybe the only one thing that the component will do is just creating the layout for all the partials that are inside. Because you don't want to create a button for every component. You want to use the common element in all other components. And I'm just reading all the components from the main root file of the second components. There are all the I divided into main parts and inner parts. Main parts are the parts that are loaded in all the pages, header, footer, sidebar, social, all the parts that are loaded in all the pages. And the other parts that aren't loaded in all the pages, I put it as an inner part. Just that for the order that when I will see the file, I will understand it better. And let's talk about a sequence partial. Sequence partials are very similar to common partials, but in the last 8 years I'm working in two news companies, Walla News and now investing.com, and there are so many components that are for news, I just decided to separate them to other layer of components. And if you don't understand the components view, this is the colors. Every color is another component of sequence, of type of sequences. And I'm just doing the same, import all those sequences in the third layer. And now come the fun part. Because in every programming language and for every developers, there is the sickness of creating common, and generic, and you have 102 generic components, and nobody remember what generic you have, and you have some generic that is so close to the other generic, and how can we solve it in CSS? I created two types of entities that telling something very specific. Entities and pages, and another entities type of pages. The main type of entities, let's say we have a common pop-up that we use in all our websites. But in the date picker pop-up, we need to make some difference from the common pop-up component. As I'm adding an entity that starts with the letter E and give it its name that explain why we need this component, like a date picker pop-up. And there is a small fun part, and let's see if you are smart enough to understand what I'm explaining you now. The pop-up date picker will add or override style of the common pop-up. Yes? Okay? This is what it's doing. It's entity of the common pop-up. But how I can make sure that this style will override the style of the common pop-up and note that the style of the common pop-up will override the each pop-up date picker. How I can make sure? No. How I can make sure?
The order of the.
Use the important.
Yes, what is it?
The order where you write the classes name?
Yes, but how I make sure that it will happen? And I explained it to you, but I want to see if you understand what I've done. I've done it just seconds ago. I have 5 layers of type of partials, and the common pop-up is in the second layer, and entity is in the 4th layer, and this way I'm making sure that this is winning. Understand? This is why I created the folder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Understand the idea?
Mm-hmm.
And all the entities are in the 4 layer. This way, I'm sure that it will override and I'll not need to give you 2 classes, like a common pop-up.e pop-up date picker. Understand the idea? Okay. And I'm using only one entity for a component. Why is that? Because we are for developers, people, product managers, cannot remember that there is an entity of an entity. And sometimes it's better that if you see that you have closer entities, talk to the product manager and maybe to tell him, we have one, don't create me another one. And if you still want one, it's better to duplicate the code and create another entity, but don't make any dependencies. If you're making dependencies in entities, this is the best way to break your own code very quickly. This is one of the things I'm never doing. Only one entity per component. And let's talk about an entity of type of pages. Sometimes, let's say we have a special holiday, a new holiday in Israel, and you want that all the common pop-up will be pink. I can add a utility class is pink to the common pop-up, but I need to add it to all of the common pop-up. And maybe tomorrow I want to that it won't be again pink. What I have an entity for a page that we can use automatically on all the pages. And this way, if I want only for this week to update all the common pop-up in the home page to pink, I'm using the entity type page that starts with the P letter and change all the common pop-up to pink. And tomorrow you want to remove the pink, you remove this file of the type of entity of page. Okay, understand the idea? Yes? Okay, we talked a lot of things in CSS architecture. I didn't cover all the things that I know because it's too much for you in one lecture. If you want more references, you have all my articles in medium.com. You can find those articles in this link. Beside this, there is we talk about CSS Grid. There is the link. There is all the lectures in my website. This is the lecture for CSS Grid. We talk about covers with CSS variables. This is full lectures of me talking about CSS variables. And for responsive design, how to create a responsive design in a big architecture, I have a big presentation here on the responsive design best practices. These two are in Hebrew. This one I have in English and Hebrew. And any more questions? No? Before we finish, friends, this is all my link that you can find me. And thank you all very much.
עכשיו שזה נגמר, אני אגיד שעכשיו אני מבין למה יש להם את כל